Welcome to Stories of Trees. I'm your host, Stacy Whittle. In each episode, we sit down with people who have dedicated their lives to understanding, caring for, and telling the stories of trees. Trees are silent witnesses to our lives, to the people who came before us, and to those who will come after us. They've seen it all, the good, the bad, and everything in between. In this podcast, we talk with the people who help us see trees differently. Scientists, storytellers, community leaders, and caretakers from around the world. We explore why trees matter, how they shape our lives, and how, in ways we're only beginning to understand, how they can help us feel better, live better, and connect more deeply to the world around us. If you've ever wondered what trees might say, you're in the right place. We're so glad you're here. So, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Stories of Trees. I'm Stacy Whittle, your host, and this podcast, and this inaugural podcast, is telling the story of trees through the lens of people who have spent their lives studying them. And we are really proud and honored to have Dr. Kathy Wolf with us today for not just the inaugural podcast series, but for the actual inaugural podcast itself. Kathy Wolf has been working in this field for 30 years. She's a social scientist from the University of Washington. But I always like for people to talk about themselves because it's easy for me to get a bio. But I love to hear about your own story and about how you arrived to where you are right now. What took you on this journey? And we have the time, so don't worry. But, people are really fascinated with you and the way that you talk about trees and human health. So I'd love to just hear more about why you do what you do and how you got to where you are today.
Well, first of all, Stacy, it's such a pleasure to be here, the beginning of this podcast series, and it's an honor, really, for me to be the first in the lineup. And your question seems pretty straightforward, but it's actually, because I've been doing this so long, it's kind of complicated. But I'll take a stab at it because often, I'm invited to do public talks for different organizations and agencies and different places. And often I'm invited to speak to a group of young people. And their question is always, how do you get from where we are to where you have evolved? How do you get from here to there? And so they're very interested in my story. And so we could talk for a full hour about that, but I certainly won't ramble that long. I'll just say that I've always had a science brain. I've always been a science nerd. I got a high school award for science when I graduated. And, early on, I've always had this thing for trees. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I've lived in other parts of the country. But growing up in Tacoma, which is a city here near Seattle, I remember climbing trees. I climbed Doug firs. So I'm, a little kid and I'm 40, 50, 60 feet up in a tree, and just this panoramic view of the world really, really gripped me. And maybe that was an influence. And then, a few years later, another key experience that I remember is I was the first urban forester for the city of Key West, Florida. And, kind of an involved story how that happened. But I will say, early on in the position, I'm standing there at the podium in front of the city council, and I'm new to this. This is the projects that I'd like to do. I need resources. I need budget. I need a truck. I need some staff. Let's make this go. And I was shut down. They just said, trees. No, we have more important things to take care of, policing and sanitation and emergency response. And I felt so, I felt like I need more. I know why trees are important, particularly in a tourism-oriented community. But I need more. I need more for these sorts of situations and these sorts of conversations. And so off I go to grad school. It wasn't long after that I went off to grad school, thought I'd become a landscape architect, finished that degree, but then got hooked into environmental psychology, and that's really kind of the core of what I do. So, for the last 30 plus years, I've been doing research about how people connect to green, mostly nearby nature in urban environments. And that's a very abbreviated story of how I got here and what I do.
It's a great story because we separately are doing a series on how to encourage young people to explore jobs that are kind of outdoor oriented, and it's called Your Office Outdoors. So it's important for young people to know that there are more jobs than just what we've been told, being a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. And so I like to hear people's story and the kind of peripatetic lifestyle that they've lived to get to where they are now. So thank you. I'm sure there's much more, and maybe we'll have another opportunity to talk about your background. But so we did a little bit of a kind of anecdotal survey to ask people what they wanted to hear from you. And they really want to know, one, what are the real impacts of nearby nature on human health? People, you read things, but you don't really know quite how it can personally impact you and your community. And then what can one do to get more involved with taking care of trees? You walk by so many trees, the question is, am I supposed to water them? People are telling me I need to take care of trees, but what does that mean? So if you could just help with those two questions, I would love to hear it.
Well, that was, first of all, you used the word peripatetic. That's one of my favorite words because I feel that's been my career path, and also I'm a walker. I love doing urban walks. And so appreciate the use of that word. You don't hear it very often, right? In these sorts of situations.
It's kind of my life has been a peripatetic lifestyle.
Yeah, so you asked two questions, and I'm really going to, maybe you'll circle back to the first, but I'm really going to start with the second, and that is, how can people connect with trees? And the first is just to recognize how fascinating they are. I mean, they're these organisms that live potentially for hundreds of years around us, and yet they're static. They're just in place, but there's so much going on in place with trees, particularly big old trees. And how do you engage with them? Well, first, just stop and reflect for a moment when you see a big tree, a fascinating tree. And there are many of them. They're still around us in urban areas, and so to recognize that is really important. Then how can you more actively connect with them? Well, if they're in your yard, I mean, that's obvious, to appreciate them, even though, you might have some cleanup and some things to do to coexist with this organism. But there's also so many things going on in cities now in community forestry, in social forestry, as I've started to hear colleagues call it. And that is, there are organizations, agencies, government agencies, local government, there are nonprofit organizations, and they realize that these trees need care. The environments that they live in need care. And so there are all sorts of stewardship programs. And that's some of the most interesting research that I've done, is a few studies here in Seattle on why are people compelled? Why are they motivated to be involved in stewardship programs where they go out and they might remove invasive plants, or they might plant trees, or they might go and put mulch around the base of these young trees to help suppress weeds and keep the moisture in the soil. And there's all sorts of motivations, but often it's a feeling of giving back, of bringing young people into your own family, loved ones, and giving back. And then we've interviewed people who are a little older who have done stewardship. I met people who have been doing stewardship projects for decades. I had no idea. And they talk about legacy. They talk about literally giving back in the moment, but giving back into the community long after they are gone. So there's so many dimensions to all of this.
No, that's incredible. We recently were in New York, and we were filming with an outfit there that does cleanup in New York City. And there was a family who have been going every year since their son was a baby and he has autism. And they said that is one of the few activities that they can do together as a family, which he truly enjoys. And so I got to meet the family and spend the day with them, and it was extraordinary. Everybody was happy. And so I got to actually experience that firsthand, and it was beautiful.
And you know what you just described kind of takes me back to the first question that you had, if I recall, which was, what are the health and well-being benefits? Well, wow, where do I start? But just a thumbnail sketch is, since I've been doing this research, and I do get invited to lots of different places to do talks to explain and describe this research. And so I sort of keep on top of it, what's going on. Yeah, there are over 10,000 studies that I'm aware of that are coming from a community of science from all over the world, investigators, researchers, people across many different disciplines, medicine, public health, psychology, ecology. It just is ever expanding. And what we see, summary, right? We only have a few minutes here, is human life course or human life cycle, or more pragmatically, cradle to grave. What we're seeing is that having nature encounters, having nature around your home is valuable for people from a health and wellness perspective from the very earliest days of our lives, even before we're born. Women who are pregnant benefit from having green around their homes, to the very latest days of our lives. And I've been reading more recently about dementia and the importance of having green in care facilities and in their own homes for people who are experiencing dementia. So it spans our entire life course. It's really remarkable.
So it feels like we're kind of going back to the way it used to be, that there was a lot of nature, and then for whatever reason with urban planning or policy, that people started making different decisions about the role of nature in cities. And now it seems like people are reconnecting to the idea that we need nature. With that, what are some of the challenges, but also what are some of the opportunities that we have right now to kind of rethink the way we create cities, and also how do we kind of retrofit cities to ensure we have more nature around us?
Yeah, if we think historically, so I have been writing a little bit. Yeah, okay, let me step back from that. I have retired almost 4 years ago from the university, but I have to say, intellectually, I'm almost more active now than when I was in a science position with the university, because I no longer have the administrative overhead. I don't have all the meetings. I don't have to hunt money, grant money, and so on. So what I'm finding is my work and how I relate to this research is more of a synthesis, more of a sense of looking for pattern. So I've been writing a little bit of late about from the sanitary to the sustainable to the sacred city. And what I mean by that is the sanitary city, there was from the late 1800s through the 1900s, we wanted to clean up our urban environments, and that meant disregarding ecology. So we put water underground, we shored up the edges, we put concrete on the edges of our rivers and streams, any that were left in the city. We just made everything really efficient, or so we saw, or so we thought. But now we're seeing the consequence of that. There are some issues now with some of those systems not working so well, or they can't handle new capacity. So now we're moving to the sustainable city. And what I mean by that is we're starting to daylight streams. We're starting to allow streams and rivers to take back their path. We're attempting to introduce ecosystems within our cities. We're also taking engineered systems and hoping they will process the world and our surroundings in a way that evokes ecology. An example is green stormwater infrastructure, where we use bioswales and rain gardens and whatnot to process water more slowly so it doesn't immediately go into the drain, the pipe, and then to the nearby shoreline. Then the last stage, sacred, is becoming very interesting to me. So from sanitary to sustainable to sacred. And I'm working with a grad student on a paper where we're exploring the intersection of urban forestry and spirituality. So the importance of reflection, even solitude, engagement with others, these different elements of the sacred that we don't think of necessarily in the city, but apparently, based on research from around the world, we're seeing that having trees and groves and small natural patches in the city helps people to sort of reconnect to the spiritual in their lives.
That's fascinating. And we're doing work in Arizona and thinking about how they're dealing with some very challenging environments with regards to urban and community forestry. And we are talking with some of the Native American communities there about this topic. And we haven't framed it that way, but I think it would be really interesting because of the kind of natural connection that these communities already have. So that's really, really, really interesting. Are you going to be publishing that anytime soon? And where can we find it?
This notion of sanitary to sustainable to sacred, I actually published 5, 6 years ago. There was a book edited by a group of people in Japan, and they invited me to contribute, and that was my contribution. I've done a couple of sabbaticals in Japan, and there's a spiritual element of how people relate to nature in Japan, even in cities. And so it was a topic that resonated there then. I think it's resonating more here now, meaning North America. But you mentioned those communities in the Southwest. Another topic that I've been writing about, and in fact have a paper coming out just in a short while. It's been accepted. It's in the publication queue, if you will, for a journal called Ecopsychology, is reciprocity. So with my understanding of the research of nature and health and all that we gain, I mean, mental health, psychological health, social health, but also nature is the fundamental source of all of our essential needs: food, water, shelter, all of that. And so a colleague, an ecologist, and I have been writing about reciprocity. And what we mean by that is not just stewardship, not just the occasional event where you go and, plant trees in your community, but a sense of kinship. How do we develop that sense of kinship? And there are different traditions where that is still there. And I think that's what you're encountering in your work in the Southwest, is that remnant of a sense of kinship. And so we're looking at different cultures where one finds that. So, for instance, in Japan, I encountered that working there, colleagues who were studying the Shinto belief system, where that there's rocks, there are rocks, there are trees, there are nature, there's water, there are nature elements in people's communities that are understood to have a spiritual essence. And so it's really quite interesting to start to be able to have the time and opportunity and, personally enough resources to allow me to do all of this, which is, I have to say, great fun, intellectually, and very satisfying.
It's also really compelling. And if you think about what I'm hearing is reverence, that I think we all have the ability to feel reverence and to experience that, but some cultures, some religions still are very close to it, and some have kind of pulled away. But I lived in Bahrain, and there was the one tree that we always talked about, the tree of life, right? And the conversation somehow always was about going to that place, seeing kind of quote unquote the oldest tree in the world. And I want to go back to your experience in Japan because I'm curious as to why you think people are still like that, why other cultures are not so much, what we can do to get there. And then I want you to circle all the way back around, and I want to talk about the survivor trees, because Kathy and I have spoken off camera about this idea of what a survivor tree is, its importance to history and to humankind. So I know that's a lot to ask you, but let's just dig into it.
Yeah. So as you probably have traveled, as I have traveled, both for vacation or leisure as well as for work, I do encounter places where trees are reverence, maybe not to that degree, but recognition of the sacred, recognition of personal spirituality, at the very least, a recognition of connection to trees within a community. And many of the faith traditions all around the world acknowledge trees, either certain trees or trees more generally within their spiritual belief system and even ceremony. And so I've been interested, I've been casually observed that, if you will, and am now attempting to understand a little bit more about it. But going back to Japan, I mentioned the Shinto belief system and that there's a spirituality to everyday objects, nature objects, and systems within people's lives, and this notion of kami. So being a science nerd, I attempted to understand, talking to colleagues with my very broken Japanese. They were very gracious and patient with me. But what is this about kami? How is kami imbued in certain? And they just looked at me like, why? Why try to understand it? It just is. And so I became more observant, if you will, rather than trying to cognitively rationalize this. And I think part of it was place attachment. So within environmental psychology, there's this notion of place attachment and how feelings toward place are very important to our mental health. We don't generally recognize that as much in the United States, but other places, I think other people may have a greater understanding of that. And I think that's part of Japan. And I think that's part of, and the Shinto belief is, an ancient belief system that's part of it as well. So connecting to place, and trees are part of that because they're so long lived. But they change. They're just like us. They age. They go through stages. And so if we pursue place attachment and a related notion or concept of place identity, so trees might become what marks a place that's important to you personally and in terms of broader community. Because Americans are known for being people who move around a lot, it's encouraged, it's accepted. Maybe we're lagging a little bit in our capacity to develop place attachment. Maybe we need to pay a little more attention to that and what's important to us in a place, even if we do move around and resettle again. But what are the natural things in our environments that help us to establish that place attachment?
I love that. So here's what I heard: recognition, reciprocity, and reverence. From that, you had the 3 S's, now you have the 3 R's. I have been struggling with, because we move around so much, how do we get rooted in that way to a place and to nature? Because you're right, many people are like, well, I don't know, I'm not going to live in that neighborhood, so it doesn't matter to me, that tree, haha, I don't need to worry about it. And I don't know how to solve for that. But I do know that it matters to the next family or community that's going to be there when you're gone. And so that's the kind of missing puzzle piece that I think I would like to explore. But let's go back for a second to Japan and to the survivor trees, because I didn't know. For everybody out there, my introduction to trees was through Kathy and trying to create a series of short films about why we should notice, see, and take care of trees. And so Kathy's taught me a lot about the whole kind of cradle to grave concept with regards to trees and how they actually have a lifespan. But there are cases where sometimes a tree is more important than its own lifespan, and we need them as maybe a sense of place or for some type of historical significance. So if we could talk about the Hiroshima tree, I would love to hear that story again.
Again, on a more personal note, you may have this question coming up, so I'm going to head it off. And that is, what's your favorite tree, Kathy? I often hear that. And there's no single tree, first of all. There's no single species. second of a type of tree. I love oaks, I love maples, I love cedars. So there's no single species, if you will, that I connect to distinctly. What I do connect with, and maybe it's my age, is gnarly trees. So I love walking in cities. When I'm invited to a place to do a talk, I love just getting out of the hotel, putting my phone in my pocket or my pack, and just walking. And sometimes I get lost, but I always have, some way to navigate back. But when I see old gnarly trees in a city, and they're beat up, they're bent over, maybe part of them looks like it's dead, but it's actually quite alive, and I can talk about that a little bit more. But I love old gnarly trees because they tell stories. Or maybe I make up stories around them, but nonetheless, they have often, you can tell from their surroundings, they have been there longer than many of the residents. They have been there longer than most of the buildings around them. They have been longer than the streets that are adjacent to them and maybe even are cutting into their roots. But they are there. And I love that sort of sense of survival of old gnarly trees. And for that reason, maybe it's, part of place attachment. Let's pay attention to them and not see them as hazard trees that have to be instantly removed and replaced with a little sapling of some sort, or replaced at all, I hope. So then taking that to Japan again, Hiroshima. I have visited Hiroshima, and it is both a tragic but an uplifting story in that the museum's there, the community itself, people are dedicated to telling that story, not in a sense of loss, in addition to a sense of loss, we have to pay attention to our relationships as people and as nations. So I have come to learn that survivors of the Hiroshima A-bomb drops, they're aging, and there are fewer and fewer of them every year. But I was at a conference recently, and there was an arborist, and arborists are the professionals that dedicate their career to taking care of trees. And there was an arborist who is taking care of survivor trees in Hiroshima. And at first, people thought, well, no. The human survivors are important, and he totally agrees with that. But what he has recognized is these trees will live longer with good care. These trees will live longer and continue to evoke the story of how nations interact, and we don't need war and conflict. And so he had a group of images at this conference, his talk. It was a 20-minute talk, but as you could tell, it really had an effect. But he just had these images of these trees. And what happened was, during the blast, there were buildings. So there are concrete walls where the force of these atoms was somehow deflected, and trees survived. And they were beat up, clearly. But they survived, and they continue to survive. And so he is now committed to building a community around nurturing and stewarding these trees, and he now offers tours. And I so want to go back to Japan and do a survivor tree tour with him. And I talked to him a bit, and he said, yeah, come back, bring in a lot of people. Yes, we can do this for you.
That's a beautiful story. Two things. One, how long can those trees live? And the second is, and then we'll move away. Actually, let's just deal with that one first. How long can that tree live?
I can't say. I'm not sure that he can say, but trees are remarkably resilient. And my first degree, biology, was a biology degree with an emphasis in botany. So I have a little bit of understanding of how trees respond in terms of physiology. But think about this. Trees are kind of a miracle because they take sunlight, they take sun energy, they take carbon dioxide, and they generate oxygen, and they grow. They keep growing, and they're survivors. They want to grow. They want to continue. So if they're stewarded, they can maintain viability indefinitely. They may not look pretty. They may begin to bust apart and lose bits, but I don't know that there's an end point in these sorts of trees if there's attention to them and caring for them. A lot of the gnarly trees that I see as I walk about cities, their lives are, they're holding on, but it's hard to say how long they'll last because people are neglecting them. People don't care about them, or there's this perception that they're a hazard. Oh, they're going to fall on things. Well, yes and no. Arborists have a lot of tricks in their toolkit to keep old trees upright and healthy, fairly healthy, and so on. Quick story. Another one of the remarkable conference presentations I've heard now a couple of times is there's a husband and wife team in Italy, and they are arborists. And their specialty is to be called in by a community or an organization to assess the quality and health of gnarly trees and see if they can restore them. And what they learned early on, and this is Italy, and what they do is they call community meetings. Well, that's not unusual, to call a public meeting about something that's going on in the community, the civic environment. But what they do is they welcome people to sit under a tree. They make sure it's safe. They welcome people to sit under the tree and tell their stories about the tree. And they hear these remarkable stories about people having grown up or moved there, or this happened there, or we had this celebration there, or we have these festivals around this tree. And so they incorporate that into their management plan, their stewardship plan for the tree. Perhaps accounting for the use of the space and how it might be used in the future. And they have all sorts of elaborate, as I said, tricks of the trade and structural healing that they can do to help an old gnarly tree stay healthy for an extended time.
That's an incredible story. One, because trees are silent witnesses to so much. They see everything that we go through over time, and they don't complain. All they ask for is a little care. But also, I like what you said. They kind of take a beating. If you have these trees along a highway absorbing pollution, and that pollution's going into their leaves, think about how much of abuse they're actually taking. I never thought about it that way. And they grow in spite of it. It's really quite extraordinary. And I mean that. Now that I see the trees, I see every nook and cranny. I walk by and I say, my goodness, even without care, you're still standing. So it really, talking with you and learning from you has changed the way I perceive the world. And in return, I feel like I'm in a better place because it's like this relationship I now have with the tree is real and somehow carrying me along. It's really quite extraordinary. But I do want to say this because I know a lot of people
May I?
No.
Yes.
Interrupt.
You
Go
use
for it.
nooks and crannies.
Yeah.
All right. So I continue to monitor research about urban forestry, particularly human health response. But of late, a colleague / friend turned me on to some literature about microhabitat. And we hear about microbiome, right? Our own gut systems and how do we maintain gut health and all of that. Well, now people are studying trees as microhabitats, and particularly gnarly trees. So if you look at a tree that's falling apart a bit and whatnot, what I've come to learn and what some of the most active or energetic research in this field now is what are the many other organisms that a small grove or even a single tree supports? So nest cavities, birds, there are all sorts of insects, pollinators that we need in our communities. Pollinators find little nooks and crannies in these trees. You mentioned pollution. Some of the most compelling research I find about trees is particulates, microparticulates that are emitted often by transportation, the streets, right? There's dust and all sorts of stuff lifting in the air. Well, it settles on tree leaves. So it's not that the trees absorb this material, but it settles on the leaves, it rains, it settles to the ground, and it's taken out of the air. Microparticulates are some of the most severe health hazards now around in urban areas of the world. So trees, pollution. I have a colleague who works with the Forest Service, and he studies lichens, tree lichens, because the lichens take heavy metal particles and stuff out of the air. And what he does is collects lichens off of trees, takes it to labs, and he can pinpoint to a finer degree than environmental agency sensors. He can pinpoint where are these concentrations of materials that are not healthy for us to breathe by testing lichens. So there's microhabitat, there's micropollution mitigation, to the point where now in Europe, I've met some people, they're doing what they call arborists again, people who manage trees. They're doing what they call veteranization. So veteran trees, old trees, veteran trees. They're intentionally messing up, if you will, healthy trees so that you get these craggy parts, so that you get nest holes, so that you get jagged ridges where these organisms such as lichen and algae can start to take hold and do what they do to help us out. So anyway, you mentioned nooks and crannies. All of that came to mind.
I love it. But trees do have to come down sometimes. And I think there's a general misunderstanding about that as well, that there is a cradle to grave concept that is very real. And while there are survivor trees and trees that should live beyond their lifespan, I really think it's important for you to tell us why it's also important for some trees to be cut down.
Yeah, that's a point of tension in some communities in some instances. And yes, trees have a life cycle, definitely, just as we do. And it's not unlike how humans age. So when they're young, in their youth, they grow fast, they put on volume really quickly, just as we do as we're moving from childhood to teen years and then early adulthood. And then there's this long span, and for some trees, species, it's decades. For some, it's centuries, literally. In October, I had a couple of friends / colleagues from England joined my husband and I, and we did a big trees tour. So we started in the Olympic Peninsula here in Washington State. We went out to the temperate rainforest. Then we went to the redwoods. Then we went to the sequoias down in California. Then we came back by the east side of these states, Bend, high desert, the pines, the juniper. It was fascinating to see all of that so quickly and talk about tree life cycles. So some trees, as I said, decades. The redwoods, sequoias, we're talking centuries. All right. So when trees are in their adulthood, early to mid-adulthood, if you will, that's when they are the most prolific in generating benefit for us. That's when they're capturing more particulates. That's when they're helping to capture stormwater before it goes into pipes and drains. That's when they're emitting the higher levels of oxygen. So adulthood, if you see adult trees, try to preserve them, try to conserve them, because often they're seen as an impediment to creating new affordable housing or to creating that or to building that. And yet they are at the age when they're generating the most benefit for us, for people who are living near them. All right, but just as we age, myself, that's what's going on now, as we age, so do trees. And the term is senescence. Senescence, the gradual sort of slow down and maybe even moving to failure of different systems. Those are the gnarly trees for the most part. But, here in retirement, I've been reading a lot more about aging. And there's 3 stages. That, in simply said, there is the go-go, which I am still in the go-go stage. Go-go, slow go, no-go. And for some people, that extends for decades. For some people, it moves along fairly quickly, different circumstances. Likewise with trees. As they are aging, there is this senescence. They're not generating quite as much oxygen. They're not providing quite the high level of benefit. But they're still go-go, and then they're slow-go. And eventually, they hit no-go. And at that point, there have to be some key decisions about the removal. Are they a hazard? Are they next to a building and presenting some hazard? Just because they're next to the building doesn't mean they're always a hazard, but hire an arborist to do that sort of assessment. Are they next to a trail in a park where there's a lot of people passing by? You don't want to endanger people. But are they in a place, if they fall, and they provide life to the next generation of plants and trees? So Suzanne Simard and her book about mother trees, that whole idea is really quite interesting. And it can happen even in cities. She tends to focus on more wildland areas where she's done her research, but it can happen in cities as well. So old trees, they're valuable in a different way, and they're important perhaps for that place attachment, and even for these feelings of reverence and spirituality. So it is, just as for we as human beings, as people, there is a cycle of life, and there is that as well for trees.
So speaking of the go-go, slow-go, no-go, imagine you're kind of on the precipice of the slow-go, no-go moment, and you're looking back on your life, and you have an opportunity to look around you and see your family, and they're like, just tell us what we need to know. And I really want you to take a moment, like you're addressing them now. Like if you were like, look, this was my legacy. If only I could have people understand this one thing, this would be it. And I mean it. You have this last moment. What would you say to your loved ones, to your community, to your neighbors, to the world? No pressure.
How do I, let's see, some verbal filler here while I think that through. Yeah.
I think it's really important. Yeah, just, you don't even have to know. It can be
that's
very
the
simple,
thing.
very
You may
profound.
expect me to say something profound, but what I have come to learn from the research that I've done myself and the evidence coming from other people all over the world who are interested in how nearby nature and nearby trees benefit us, is how the profound part of this is it goes on without us even knowing. That's what I find remarkable. So Mark Berman is a friend / colleague who recently has written a book about neuroscience, trees and neuroscience and human response. And one of the points he makes in the book is, based on his lab work with a really brilliant team, they're all brilliant, is that you don't even have to pay attention. You don't even have to think about your relationship with that tree or that park or that bit of green, and it's having a positive effect on you. You don't even have to be self-aware. If you're self-aware, that's what I'm coming to observe, is more and more people are becoming self-aware of this research or their own observations of how they relate to and feel when being in nature. Then there are other benefits, more extended benefits, if you will. And that's being played out. What I also find, I guess, is sort of profound, if you will, is the nature therapy movement. And nature bathing, forest bathing. I first heard about it. I was invited to one of the earliest conferences about forest bathing in the world to do a talk. And I participated in some forest bathing sessions. And I was skeptical when I arrived. I'm like, really? This kind of woo-woo, I came away, I was convinced, and I started talking about it in my professional talks. And now it's astounding. It's all over the world. Uh, about a year ago, as I was invited to South Korea to do a talk at a forest therapy conference, and we had a pre-conference tour where we visited 6 different forest bathing stations that have been set up and are supported by the South Korean Ministry of Forestry. These are stations where you can go. Station is too formal a word. They're not spas, they're stations, they're places where you can go for a day trip or for multiple days. Some of them are residential. And there are professional guides that have been trained and certified, and you can experience a sequence of events and encounters that bring you greater awareness to the power of trees and human health. So I think those are the two pieces that are profound to me. Is one, you don't even have to be aware that you're receiving benefit, but it's happening. And that to me suggests that local leaders, people who make key decisions about budgets and policy, have to pay attention to this, have to bring more green and conserve more green in our communities. And then the second is the purposeful benefit of forest therapy, nature bathing, forest therapy in both everyday lives and clinical practice. I am meeting more and more doctors, therapists, and so on who are becoming certified to be forest therapy guides, and they're incorporating it into their more formal, if you will, Western medicine practices.
Wow. Sometimes the most simple thing is the most profound. And I want to reiterate how grateful, how honored I am to know you. You've changed my life and my approach and my thinking around trees, and I've had the benefit of then sharing that outward. So really, I'm so happy that you joined us. I'm so honored that you've done this work, and please don't stop doing it. Keep in the go, slow go, not in the no go.
Yeah, I'm working hard on the go.
We
I'm
need
trying
you.
to make that continue for a while.
Yeah, keep go until the no go, no slow go. I love that. I'm going to use it now forever. But anyway, thank you so much, Kathy. We look forward to speaking with you again. Just one last thing. If there's are there any resources that you would suggest that people look at, or websites apart from storiesoftrees.org that people should refer to if they have more questions about forest bathing or about just the general benefits of trees?
There again, maybe this is profound as well, is the number of publications, first on the science side. So if you're interested in getting into the nitty-gritty of this science, Google Scholar. So if you use Google Scholar and you you enter for keywords your interest, mental health and nature, dementia and nature, babies and nature, children in nature, all sorts of things come up. And what you want to look for then are look at another level for review article. So in academia, what we do is there's a body of research, and it goes on, and people do these smaller research questions. But then there's kind of a critical mass, and someone says it's time for a review. And they pull together these related articles, and they do a synthesis, and it's still not light reading. But the synthesis, then you see sort of the trends, the patterns in the research. So that's one part. The other is general Google, nature and health. Authors, there are many authors now that are publishing this material, and there's probably some websites that will come up as well. I have a couple of websites. I have colleagues now all over the world that have websites. So there's just an abundance of information. Forest bathing, if you type that in, you'll get all sorts of content. So I don't recommend any single sources. It's kind of fun to poke at this now because there are so many interesting topics and findings.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. And as we all know, it's really important to see the trees, to notice them, and care for them. So thank you again, Dr. Kathy Wolf, and we'll see you again.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us for Stories of Trees, brought to you by Corazon Latino. Before you go, we have a simple ask. See them. Notice them. Care for them. Until next time, stay connected to the trees around you and stay tuned for our next episode. This podcast was supported by the Urban and Community Forestry Program at the USDA Forest Service.